The park on the beach down here is called Tres Picos. It's a very useful park when we have to land on the beach. First, it gives us a grassy green area where we can land without damaging the paraglider. Second, it's a very large area, much better than the beach, which is super narrow. Now there are two drawbacks with this landing. The first is the high voltage power lines. They run from below the park all the way up the cliff and are quite hard to see. You have to first try to identify where the poles are, and then draw an imaginary line to understand where the cables run. There's the pole, the cable below the pole, the other pole below, and the cable runs across between them. The problem is here. When we make the approach and we have a tailwind, these high-voltage cables are right in our perfect approach path, so you have to be very, very careful and spot them before arriving. Once we visualize them, we can go wide around them and then move back closer to the cliff to make the approach. Here are the high-voltage cables that go from the beach up to the top of the cliff. Those three cables go straight up, creating a kind of barrier that, if you don't see them, makes it very easy to crash into them while flying, especially because you're flying with a tailwind in that direction, like a deadly trap. Those cables. The other drawback is at the runway threshold, where we begin the approach. There's a breakwater, and we basically have to fly about 20 to 30 meters from the shoreline. It's like the park is cut off. There's the breakwater and then the sea. So if I make the approach over the water to try to land on the grass, and the wind is strong and coming cross from the south, a venturi or outflow effect is created. In this area, the wind escapes along that side of the cliff and accelerates. If I position myself there, over the water to make my approach, and the wind is very strong, it will prevent me from reaching the park, and I could end up in the sea. And even worse, I might end up far from the shore. That can be very dangerous. Many pilots have ended up in the sea. They've landed in the water because the venturi effect, the outflow, didn't allow them to advance toward the park. That's why you have to pass the cables wide, then move back closer to the cliff and make the approach while avoiding doing it over the water. Usually I use the H of the helipad and the small hut below as visual references for the approach, and I try to land here, in this area that is free of trees. Right now, I'm passing over the high-voltage cables. They are extremely dangerous. There have been many accidents with pilots who didn't see these cables. They come in with a tailwind at low altitude for landing and suddenly face them head-on. So the main danger is the high-voltage cables. And the second danger is making the approach over the sea and falling short because the wind doesn't let us move forward and reach the park. In this sector, we see Tres Picos Park and how it cuts off here. So if we start the approach over the sea to land here, what can happen is that we end up landing in strong wind over the water. If we land around this area, we'll have quite a distance to swim to reach the shore. If we end up closer to the park, we might try to swim toward it. But that area is very rocky and has strong currents. The safest option is to swim to the shore, landing at Redondo Beach. Landing here at Redondo Beach, below Larcomar, is much easier than at the beaches below the paragliding launch. We have a much wider beach, and there are no poles close to the shore. That allows us to land and lay the wing down next to the walkway without much trouble. Also, with a bit more precision, you can land between the small soccer and volleyball fields. There are sandy patches that are safer for landing, but you need accuracy because they are relatively short sections. There are even areas of mixed sand and dirt where it's safer to land. It's basically like two very long beaches that can be used almost like a runway. The beaches below the paragliding launch are smaller. You just need to be careful with some high-voltage cables located about 200 meters from Larcomar. These cables run from the edge of the cliff down to the beach, and if we fly low, we can't cross them. They are not as dangerous as the cables at Tres Picos Park because they are somewhat hidden between cliff sections. So you really have to be flying very low to encounter them. Right now, I'm passing just above these cables. Still, if we're not paying attention, a pilot could run into them. Fortunately, that hasn't happened so far. The rest of the ridge is free of high-voltage cables. It's very safe to fly along this entire ridge. Unfortunately, you can't always reach this beach. From the launch site to Larcomar, you have to fly against the wind. The prevailing wind is from the southeast, so you have to go upwind. We only use this beach for landing when we're already flying at Larcomar and the wind drops. If we take off from the launch without wind, or with crosswind, it's almost impossible to reach these beaches. That's why most landings happen on the beaches below the launch, which are shorter, narrower, and have light poles close to the shoreline. In the previous video, part 1 about beach landings, we covered all the beaches below the launch. In this video, we've seen the more distant landing spots, Tres Picos Beach and Redondo Beach. Even though this is a very specific topic, I've been surprised by the number of views it has received. Most likely in a third video, I'll talk about landings in more distant districts like San Isidro or Barranco. It's important that any paraglider flying in these areas already knows where the alternate landing zones are, especially in Barranco, where the beaches are narrow and there are many high-voltage cables crossing the ridge. In this area, you also need to be very careful with the wind, which can suddenly start blowing from land to sea, causing you to unexpectedly find yourself flying in rotor conditions. Thank you very much for watching up to this point. Give it a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to my channel if you want more content like this. See you in the next video.